You recorded a great episode. Then momentum resets to 0. Files in one app, tasks in another, guest follow-up somewhere else, promotion buried in tabs. That is how pod fade starts. Podglue is the podcaster's operating system. One workspace for creation, planning, growth, and guest relationships. Import your RSS feed, pull in your episodes, and turn each one into a living asset with transcripts, social copy, and launch-ready materials. No more tool sprawl, no more broken handoffs. Podglue is the vehicle. Relationships are the engine. Stop letting disconnected tools kill your momentum. Join the waitlist at podglue.com.
Start off that we're techies. We were born in the tech world, basically. Our parents were techies. We are techies. And yet we could not figure out some of the simplest things to do because we're techies and we were used to the hard stuff. So going simple was difficult. And I want to start with that. But then I would say because of our neurodivergence that we discovered through talking on this podcast and through therapy, Mike gets bored easy, like real easy. So what better way to give him something to do than for him to edit? And he gets out of my hair. I'm able to do what I want to do, read whatever it is that I'm interested in doing. And it keeps me from like trying to strangle him. And it works. We get a great product. He's alive. I'm not in jail. And, what better way could you do that?
Mike and Dory did not start a podcast because the timing was perfect or the gear was right. They started because the silence was no longer acceptable. Mike spent years co-owning an internet radio network in Ohio, learning what it means to hold a microphone in the service of something bigger than yourself. Dory spent years insisting in whatever room she was in that people who get dismissed deserve to be heard. When a soccer game left her permanently disabled, and when the medical system's response was to look the other way, she stopped insisting quietly. Together, they created the Othering Podcast, a weekly show that gives a platform to the disabled and LGBTQ+ communities, featuring new guests every Monday. The name is the point. The people the world labels as other are the people this show brings to the center. Mike carries his own experience with disability into every conversation. Dory carries a calling that predates the podcast by decades. What they have built together is not a show about marginalized communities. It is a show that refuses to let the word marginalized be the last word. Let's get this conversation started.
I want to talk about you both, number one, because you guys have been doing a podcast for a while. And part of the reason most people stop doing podcasts is because they start understanding the work, the dedication, the time and the energy that goes into it. Creators, any new podcasters, any new aspiring podcasters who want to get started and want to do their own podcast. Why should you do a podcast, especially when you're not sure anyone is listening? What was the first thing for you guys when you started doing the Othering podcast to build an audience?
I started actually kind of amassing people that had similar disabilities to me, like, fellow wheelchair users, crutch users, and those that had chronic pain and various types of things to kind of, at first, just to create a sense of community, to feel not quite so alone. And that's kind of where it started. And then I also followed LGBTQ people because I was questioning myself a lot, and adding those people to my list was nice. And it made me feel like, okay, I'm not this crazy person that's landed from out of outer space. I'm not hatched from an egg or something like that. And these are universal feelings. And that's kind of where we started with our audience.
So in starting doing this, you had already started amassing a community before you launched your actual podcast. She did.
It was her.
Okay. So in starting in the community part first, what advice would you give someone who has a great idea for starting a podcast and doesn't know exactly where to begin as far as how to build a community? What was some of the things that you did that was the part of the outreach that you did to start building essentially a following that you would have built in once you started creating a podcast?
I'm going to say to start a podcast, you don't need a following. You don't need to build that community. That's up to you. You can start a podcast with your topic that you want to do and just start talking. Everyone deserves to have their voice out there. As far as your question is concerned, I think it's a matter of just getting out there and just trying to talk to people, asking questions, and just connecting. Social media is a huge help with that now. That would be really hard without social media. So just kind of getting out there and not being so afraid and looking into different things.
And, talk to the people that you start following and kind of leave comments, nice comments, of course, for them, and try to build a rapport that way. And even if they don't answer, because sometimes they just can't, that doesn't mean that they're ignoring you or anything like that. Just sometimes it takes a bit and they will get back to you. And that's partially how I kind of gathered my community. Was I was starting to, as scary as it was, just talk to them in their videos or their posts to kind of start a friendship up.
We're actually very introverted people.
Yes.
So.
And part of where most people probably hit that wall is deciding, hey, look, I don't know if I'm introverted. I really don't like to talk too much. So what was it like for both of you in the beginning, creating a podcast, if you've especially if you've never done it before, like developing continuity, the chemistry, the structure of how to actually start developing what will eventually be your template as you start moving forward and recording? What was that like in the beginning? Who does most of the legwork?
I would say Mike does the legwork behind the scenes.
She does all the talking.
Yeah, I'm the talker. Even though I am more of an introverted person, I don't have a problem with just talking because I like making people feel comfortable to not only talk, but just be around me. And sometimes being that boisterous or being silly, just gets people relaxed and able to talk. And that's kind of what I like doing. It also stems from the fact that I used to be a teacher. And as a teacher, everybody knows that you have to sometimes stand on your head and, walk on it at the same time and to get your students interested in anything that you're saying.
And I am a very, very quiet person in real life. And I did internet radio. Well, we both did 20 years ago. And I kind of found that I don't feel like I'm talking to a lot of people because I don't see them in front of me. So it kind of changes the dynamic there. And with that, I'm able to kind of let go of my fears because this is just a phone call as far as I'm concerned. There's not going to be 50, 100,000 people listening to it. It's just you and I. So it doesn't bother me anymore at that point. And then with editing, as far as getting the show all set up and getting our routine down, that took a while. Honestly, I would say we didn't have it really good set up until maybe a month ago.
Yeah.
And now I have it where I have things set up where I can just copy and paste the intro in. I can copy and paste the outro in and I'm done. I don't have to go through all the stuff I was going through before, and it makes it so much easier. And I've learned the shortcuts on the audio editing software to remove silences and stuff like that. And it changed everything.
Yeah. And that's, when people, so I'm going to ask this question. What did you think the podcast was going to be before it started? And kind of how has it sort of evolved as you've gone along, from what you initially envisioned, what it was actually going to be? Because I know I've done a few of these things and they change.
Yeah. When we first started, we were in the car and Dory suggested, let's do a podcast about disabled and LGBTQ. And like she had said, she had been on social media for a while. And I said, okay, see if any of your new connections would be interested in it, kind of get a feel for it out there. And I'm thinking, we might be able to get 5 or 10 guests. We'll see what we can do. And we went with that. And it was not that. That was not the case. It blew up. We got a lot of interest in it and everything. And it really shocked us. It was a huge surprise.
Yeah, I thought we might have 6 months at the most because, I was thinking people aren't going to talk to us. We're nobodies. We're not like these famous people that you hear about doing podcasts. We're just people. And so I figured maybe 6 months. And yeah, that was so wrong. It was very, very wrong. And I want to say that it's a good wrong. And, sometimes you have those expectations and you think it's going to be temporary or it's going to be like the shortest thing ever. And it isn't. And it's nice. And it just kind of, it's like a good scary and it's like shocking at the same time.
Yeah. And I just want to say, number one, that you guys have done a lot of the legwork from building down from nothing and realizing that this was going to be a task, because most podcasters, there's a belief that most podcasts don't get beyond 6 episodes, because people start realizing, this is a lot of work. This is a lot of energy. This is a lot of time that I'm committing to this. So what was it for the both of you to move past that in the very beginning, especially for a lot of new podcasters who have this idea that, you guys had the opposite idea. We're not going to have a lot of people, but there's some people that start, I have this great idea. I know that people will listen, and they start, and then they realize crickets. It's slow traction. So you guys have done, 58 episodes in. That takes a lot. That's a lot of commitment to doing this. So what would you say to any podcaster who has just started and is realizing they're frustrated with how it's actually going, what kind of traction they're getting with building an audience or getting people to listen or download or subscribe to their podcast?
I would say that definitely it's going to take time. Patience is one of the biggest things. Mike is not a patient person. I am on this, at least here. There are other things. And because we've been together for so long, we can kind of help balance each other out. And I think that's where a lot of other podcasters sometimes just don't get that far, because they don't necessarily have another person to kind of help pick up some of the slack. And it is daunting at times to, have to perform in a way and talk, and you don't always feel like it. But you just got to keep going.
And we managed to keep going. Honestly, it's because of the guests. They're scheduled. We have it set up. We have to do it. We've tried other podcasts without guests, just the two of us. And like you said, it lasted maybe 6 episodes, and we just couldn't keep up because we wouldn't sit down and do it every week. That's so much harder, in my opinion, when you don't have someone sitting there waiting on you. That really keeps us scheduled.
So there's an accountability on the other end of saying, hey, look, I've made the commitment to this other person who I'm going to talk to. I have to go through with it. Even if I'm like, the introverted side of you says, let's not do it. Let's not go down that path. Okay. So Dory, you said something. You said that building the show healed you. So it healed something in you, that it made you feel less alone. Say a little bit more about that. What does podcasting give back to the host, not just the audience? What do you guys get out of it?
Family, like a sense of, added family. And I know that sounds cheesy and crazy, but I really do feel like I am gaining more family members. Coming from a rather big family myself, being away from them, sometimes it gets lonely. And, being an adult, sometimes adulting sucks. And you just kind of get in your head a lot of times. And sometimes you feel like, even though it's wrong, but you feel like you're completely alone. There's nobody else who knows what you're going through. Nobody else feels the same way you do. And it was hitting me in ways that was ruining my relationship with Mike, with my kids.
She was a pain in the ass.
Yes, I was. I was angry, and I was just sad, and my debilitating disability decided to debilitate me. And it was just frustrating. And then when I finally started kind of reaching out on social media for our podcast, and I started talking to these people and looking at them in wheelchairs or whatever they were using, and still going to work and, sharing their hardships. And I felt like, okay, if they can do it, I can do it. And then when I actually talked to them, it was like releasing this huge weight off of me and realizing physically, mentally, all of that in that moment, I really am not alone.
I think you've hit on something that a lot of new podcasters don't realize. They think just because they're talking to people or they're interviewing people that there's not something that's reciprocal back to you. And it's something that is healing in terms of, hey, look, you have a platform now to express, to share, and you have people who are listening that your story or what you're talking about or who you're interviewing will resonate with them. So it brings it back around full circle. I love that answer.
We try very hard to make it conversational and make it more personal and not like interrogation on them or anything like that. So we try to give them that very safe, comfortable feeling. And that's a lot of her.
Well, part of that safe feeling is that you got to share a little bit of yourself too. If you're asking people to talk to you, tell me your fears or what makes you happy or how did you do X, Y, and Z, you also have to kind of share a little bit of yourself. That's also where the healing takes place too, is by sharing myself. And they're not saying, oh my God, what's wrong with you? And they're like, instead saying, I understand. I do that too. That makes a huge difference. And understanding like you're not the only person that didn't talk much, but would talk a lot during class time. Or that, would wear mismatched clothes because it just felt right. And hearing other people say, I did that too. That is where the connection comes in. And that's where you benefit from giving a little of yourself.
Both of you, you pull a lot of your guests from the communities that you're used to talking to and talking about. And, a lot of the people that are in your community, they're always in the news. It's always in legislation. It's in other people's stories. What is something like creating a podcast do for someone to hear a voice that sounds like theirs in their earbuds? What do you think that does for them, the people that are listening to your show?
It does what Dory just explained. It does what it did to Dory. Just makes them feel less alone. It really helps them feel like they're not weird or unusual and that they are just a normal human like everyone else, even though they may be disabled or unfortunately it's the case on the LGBTQ spectrum that you're considered weird and unusual. Shouldn't be that way. But just hearing other people talk about it, knowing that you're like everyone else and knowing that you're just a regular human and you're normal, I think it's extremely healing and satisfying for a guest or a listener.
And we try to make everybody laugh. And, they always say you get those stickers that say laughter's the best medicine. And it really is, because it makes you see certain things that have happened in your past or that are currently happening and be able to laugh at it.
Do you schedule out ahead, like how many guests you want to have on? Or is it like for you both a week by week thing, or, are you guys planners, or are you just like, we're going to just fly by the seat of our pants?
We're planners. Yeah, we're both. Get the guests, like I said, through social media. For the most part, they come to us. We put out a couple posts looking for guests. And then as I schedule them, we put them in about 4 different calendars to make sure we don't forget, which is a big one. And I think I have a big problem with saying no. And that's something I would not recommend for upcoming podcasters. But I say yes to guests and I keep putting them in as soon as I can. So I end up kind of filling up the calendar, maybe more than I should have. So we end up batch recording a whole lot ahead of time. Like almost as many are recorded that aren't out as already released. So we're organized with them. But yeah, I do too many. We do about 3 a week and we release 2 a week. So we're way ahead of the game.
Well, that's interesting because that's one of the things that I want to touch on, because what kind of boundaries when you're starting a podcast do you say that you need to set for yourself so that you don't run into the idea of burnout or, again, conflicts in schedule, things that need to shift and change? So what would you say as far as someone who comes to you and says, hey, I'm starting a podcast, I want to do 5 a week? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I would say don't. But it also depends on your personality. If you are a fly by the seat of your pants type of person, there's going to be some things that you're going to have to write down, you're going to have to schedule. But at the same time, go with that flow because it has to fit you. It can't be what you imagine, a corporate would want or something like that. It has to literally fit how you are in your life. Because if it doesn't fit you, you're not going to want to do it. No matter how many people you have booked, you're not going to feel up to doing much of anything because it doesn't, fit in your life.
Make sure it's something you love. That's how we can do this. We love doing it. We both love it. We love talking to the people. We love meeting everyone. So 3 a week doesn't feel like a chore to us. We look forward to it. And last year in November, December, we said November 15th to January 2nd, we were going to take off for the holidays. You know how many episodes we recorded in that amount of time? We probably had 10, 15 episodes recorded in that amount of time because people kept coming to us and I couldn't say no. I'm like, yeah, we'll get you in. I don't want you to wait till January. You can have November.
That leads me into the next part of developing your podcast. Now, how do you guys start the idea of promotion? Because that's almost just as important as creating it, recording it, and then doing the editing. What would you suggest? What channels can you start out that are easy for a lot of new podcasters who have no idea once they get into it and they say, okay, I've created it. I got it on my distribution channels. Come listen to it. Like, what are some of the things you would tell people to say, hey, have a more ideal plan as far as how you promote?
I think that's one of the hardest parts of having a podcast, to be honest, because you can promote it to 2,000 people and you might get one listener out of those 2,000. It's so few and far between. But my answer is talk about it any chance you get. Talk about it on all the social media, from Facebook, Instagram, Threads, whatever you got. Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. And then something we did, this may not be for everyone, but we actually got approached by an internet radio station near the beginning of our podcast to air our podcast on their station. At the time, it was once a week. Now it's 4 times for that station. But that right there is excellent promotion. And by doing that, I ended up reaching out to others. And so now we're on a total of 3 different internet radio stations. And that's another great way to do promotion. And doing this, being on other people's podcasts and guesting on other podcasts. I think we've been on 10 or 11 since we started in May of last year, just talking and getting to know people and getting our voices out there.
That's a big part of it for a lot of creators who go down this path, is simply saying the promotion part, because a lot of people feel kind of yucky in self-promotion, saying, hey, listen to me. But it's also the idea of why you started is so that you can talk and have a place and a platform to share. What do you feel most people get wrong when they start a podcast? What do you think that is probably one of the biggest mistakes that you've either heard of or read about of people when they get started in creating a podcast? Because
I think people expect a higher number of listeners than you're going to have in the first month.
I think that a lot of time,
unless you're
that the first things that I think that some get wrong is that they don't share, they don't talk about it, and they don't actually ask their guests to promote themselves too.
Yes, that's a big one.
That's a golden one that a lot of people absolutely miss out on when they have somebody on and say, hey, by the way, could you just share it with your socials or, kind of do the cross promotion thing?
I think I'm actually kind of annoying about that at this point. Really push my guests to do the self-promotion or the promotion. And what's funny about that is, like you said, I was scared to do that in the beginning. I had a friend, I guess I still have a friend, the same friend, that is a podcaster, and his is doing like really well, like monetized and everything really, really well. And I just flat out asked him, is it okay to ask a guest to promote their episode? He's like, yeah, you should always do that. So now I do it.
Here's another one that I hear that a lot of podcasters kind of have a problem with. And I know this is the medium that we're talking about and recording yourself, but they have a hard time listening to their own voice.
Yes.
So how do you move past that the first few times? Because if you've never done it before, if you've never had an interview with anybody, it is sort of weird to go back and listen to yourself and say, man, I sound terrible.
So I'm going to give the funny answer first.
Yeah.
So like I said, 20 years ago, we had the internet radio station. And when I was doing that, all the ladies, all the girls that was listening would say my voice is just so wonderful and dreamy and great. And that boosted my ego enough to where I felt comfortable with my voice. Because before that, I hated it. But because all the girls liked it, I got comfortable on it.
Yeah, I was told that I had a great voice for phone sex operators. And so I just kind of like, okay, thank you. And I still don't like listening to my voice a lot of times. Yeah, that's partially why he does the editing. And I get it that sometimes it's just like, it's nerve-wracking listening to your own voice or listening even to what you have to say, because it's like, you already know what it is. I would say that don't listen to it immediately after you've finished. Let it get a little cold so that when you go look at it again to edit it and such, you're not focused so much anymore on your voice. You're focusing on what was said. And I know that sounds difficult, but it really isn't. Because once you start just focusing on what was said and does it flow right as you're editing, you're going to ignore your own voice.
And remember that the listener is there to hear you. So whether you like it or not, the listener does.
Right.
Or they wouldn't be there.
I like that. I'm like you, Mike. I was very acclimated to listening to my voice. So when I started getting into this, I was like, I'm fine with it. It doesn't bother me. I had more problem watching myself.
Yeah, yes. Me too. That's why don't record audio or video.
Yes, that's why I was like, let me start with this medium of doing the audio part first, because I can listen to myself. I just have a hard time looking at myself sometimes.
I don't like looking at myself, and I sometimes will sit there and end up staring at myself, and I'm like not paying attention because I'm spacing out because I'm too focused on staring at myself, looking ridiculous in my mind, and it takes away from the show. I think in our case, partially, we don't like to do video is because of that, and we want people to come to us and feel relaxed, not feel like they have to get their hair perfectly done or wear the right outfit. And I want you as you.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's what I would rather have, is somebody just to be themselves, real and authentic, and have to put on a performance. Like that's, I don't think you're going to get the best out of people when you interview them. So as far as the technical side, this is probably more, we'll lean a little bit more on Mike. What were some of the beginning things that were very frustrating for you in learning the process of how to actually edit a podcast, and what you in your head would realize or think, this sounds good?
Luckily, I had some help because of my past in internet radio. So getting the setup wasn't that hard. Like we have a soundboard and microphones and everything. That wasn't too bad. When it came to the editing in the beginning, I would listen to the whole thing from beginning to end, normal speed. And I would go through deleting the different coughs, or not coughs, but the ums and ahs. I would delete the silences one at a time. And I would, like at the beginning, we have promotions for the radio stations we're on, or at least 2 of them. And I would put each one of those in individually, then put our intro in individually. And over time, I realized there's buttons that do that for you. You don't have to do all that stuff. And then I can just create like a beginning file that has all the ads and the intro in one file, put that in. And it makes it, I've probably saved an hour of time with how I do it now. And I can even listen to it at like 1.5 to 2 times speed now when I'm editing, because I'm just looking for really the things that are really out there that need to be taken out, not necessarily every and because that's human. We're all going to do that. Some of those are okay.
Yes. In context, they work where they're supposed to, right? Mm-hmm. I don't have to remove every single one of them.
Technically speaking, in the beginning, we were going for free. We didn't have much money to start this. So we had microphones from the old days. We had the soundboard from the old days. We didn't want to pay a bunch for something like software like Riverside and all those others. So we went with Google Meets, which is free on Google. And we went with like WavePad and Audacity for editing because it's free. So we tried to do it as free as we could. And of course, you got to pay for some stuff to get it out there. But
of course. And that's where you already you kind of already went down that path of like what the expectation is as far as financially committing yourself to creating a podcast. I'm someone who's very much like yourself. I try to find the most inexpensive ways, or especially for podcasters, because I realize that many of them in the beginning don't know what they're doing, number one. Number two, the cost involved, and they think of this astronomical number like, oh, I got to have professional mic, because it's comparatively how they see themselves to other creators, and they go, oh my God, they have this nice mic, they have all this nice lighting, they have all this other stuff. I don't know if I can do that yet, but I like the fact that you're like, hey, look, I had to learn the free way, because I think that's part of the process. It's learning how to develop your systems. What were some of the things
to do it within your budget?
Yeah. So what were some of the things that you had to shift and change to make a system that would work for yourselves, so that you could create and process 3 to 4 podcasts at a time because I struggled in the beginning with just doing one. So I can't imagine what it's like doing 3 or 4. So what were some of the shortcuts or things that you put into place for yourselves so that it allowed you to do the things like one of the ones you mentioned, of course, that most podcasters are unfamiliar with is batch recording. So like, what are those sessions like when you get started, and how do you maximize your time so that so you don't find yourself on the edge of feeling
I would
tired
like to
and burnt
start
out?
off that we're techies. We were born in the tech world, basically. Our parents were techies. We are techies. And yet we could not figure out some of the simplest things to do because we're techies and we were used to the hard stuff. So going simple was difficult. And I want to start with that. But then I would say because of our neurodivergence that we discovered through talking on this podcast and through therapy, Mike gets bored easy, like real easy. So what better way to give him something to do than for him to edit? And he gets out of my hair. I'm able to do what I want to do, read whatever it is that I'm interested in doing. And it keeps me from like trying to strangle him. And it works. We get a great product. He's alive. I'm not in jail. And what better way could you do that?
Yeah, what should you say? So what you started to talk about in the beginning there for new podcasters, there are really good cheap microphones out there, like
Yes.
USB microphones. You can get one for like $60 to $80 that are plenty for a podcast. You don't need the $300 Shure microphone, brand new ones. I have a fancy one, but you don't need that to get started.
No.
She has like 4 different ones that she's bought since we started in the last year because we've had lots of different.
Now I've got a good one and it's like my baby. So this one's going to work.
And there's always going to be problems.
Be prepared for that. Definitely. And when recording, be prepared for, mess ups. Sometimes internet is going to say, not today. And, things happen, and just be prepared for that and don't, stress about it.
It's okay. Just fix it and move on.
So that brings another question to mind. So when you have a guest and you've booked them and then there are a no-show, what are some of the things that you kind of do to say, I've planned for this time? Do you guys say, oh, let's just record a solo podcast, just us talking? Or do you just call it a day, pack it in and say, okay, especially if you haven't heard anything from the guest? Have you ever had that happen to you?
It's very frustrating because, like I said, we batch record so much. We don't have to worry about episodes coming out and having to fill that spot. We've got it taken care of. We've set that time aside specifically for the guest to be on the show, and we've taken the time out of our day and everything. And to not let us know or anything, it's frustrating. We understand shit happens, but yeah, it's frustrating. If you cancel beforehand, let us know. We'll happily reschedule you. That's not a problem at all. Even if it's an hour before the show, we'll still do it. But
Ghost us, And I think it's frustrating because the two of us are also disabled. And so, we try to set things up so that it's accommodating not just for us, but for other people that are disabled as well, so that they're able to be there and, however we can help them. And it kind of just gets frustrating when somebody doesn't respect your time. And again, we understand life happens. Sometimes you can't immediately get to us, but try to get to the person that you have scheduled with. It's just as frustrating as like if you're going to a doctor's office and an emergency happens, you're sitting there for hours. And then they tell you at the end of the day, after you've sat there for hours, oh, by the way, you're not going to be seen. It's kind of that feeling.
Yeah. At what point as a host do you give up on waiting for them? Do you wait 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Sometimes they're a little late. That's always a struggle too, figuring out exactly how long you wait before.
I say the teacher wait. When I was in high school, we would give the teacher like 10 minutes. And if they didn't show up in 10 minutes, we were out of class. So I would say, set a boundary and make sure that you try to stick to it. Sometimes it's hard and you want to make sure that you're, giving some leeway for certain people. But at the same time, you can have that boundary of past this time, no matter what happened, I'm done for the day or, for the week or whatever it is that you're doing. And we'll pick it up next time.
Yeah. So have you ever had a guest that was very difficult to deal with? And what kind of vetting process do you guys have in place as far as who you're inviting on whenever you have guests? Do you just like, hey, come on? Or is it, let's just at least exchange emails, or have some people have a pre-show consultation where they'll sit down with the guests and see if they're the right fit.
We have a pretty simple, laid back process. Usually, always, it's me. They'll either email, DM us on social media, whatever, and I'll talk to them to the point that I know that they're either disabled or a part of the LGBTQ community.
Or both.
Or both, because that's one absolute must have, or a strong advocate. So I'll just kind of make sure I know in general what about them. And then I'll book them. And before the show, we ask them to kind of write their introduction for us. And that way we kind of see the direction they want the interview to go. We see what they want to talk about, what they don't want to talk about. And we kind of guide the interview from that intro that they write us.
And then I was going to say, and as far as guests who have been very difficult to kind of navigate the interview with.
Yeah,
you had a few.
There have been some that have completely commandeered the entire thing. We didn't get a word in edgewise. We couldn't ask anything because as soon as we said hello, they just started, and it was just rambling, and it was frustrating because it's like, I want them to talk, but it's a show in a way, and it's a conversation, and it's supposed to be a conversation between like friends, and even friends sometimes shut up a little bit so that you can talk. And so there's that one. And then there's also the ones where they don't talk at all. And you ask an open-ended question and it's yes, that's it. And you're going to have to, I guess you could say, put on that mask, be polite, and find a way to fill in with ad libs or, a paragraph or a whole dissertation or two, depending on the person.
I always say if she weren't here, our episodes would be about 5 minutes long. But I can't talk enough. She does all the talking. She can fill in those gaps. And we also have had issues with language barrier before, talking to people from overseas that was either hard to understand or they couldn't understand us well. And that was a real challenge as well. In fact, that one actually was never able to be released. It's definitely something where to future podcasters that think about it and make sure you do vet your guests before you bring them on and look into it.
So what would you suggest now that you've done this enough times and you have the experience when a guest does come on like that and they want to commandeer and hijack the whole conversation? How, as you host, navigate a way to still maintain control over the conversation?
Pretty bad about that. I would not say we're experts.
I would say, thinking back, you want to kind of, because it's not live, so that it allows you to then kind of interject and say, sorry, can I say something? And, get in there. Again, be polite as possible because they're also taking time out of their day to talk to you.
Absolutely.
And you want to be respectful back and forth. That doesn't mean that stuff may not be, happening behind the scenes, and there are possible fair share of drama, but you want to make sure that you're staying calm and just, okay, I get what you're saying, but let me get in here. I want to say something here. And, we're bad at that, but that's what I would say for future podcasters.
Yeah, to understand that there are going to be situations that you find yourself in where you don't know what that person's going to kind of do, and you allow them to come on. So here's one more, and then we'll start wrapping up. So I know that you are together and you're doing a podcast together, but what would you say to someone who's wanting to start a podcast, but they also want to bring on a co-host? What are, say, some of the two things that you have to maintain a good relationship and chemistry as co-host of a podcast, as far as like who's going to control the questioning, or how, who leads the conversation, who's going to do all the front end or the back end work? How does that would you say, needs to be discussed before you decide, I'm going to go beyond just doing a solo podcast, I'm going to have a co-host along with me?
I think one thing is, like, especially for a podcast like ours, you should make sure you have the same vision going into it, have the same beliefs.
Yes.
Don't start a podcast like ours and you hate disabled people. I mean, that wouldn't work
Yes.
as a co-host.
And, not only, I'd say take your time finding that person, because you want it to not only have that chemistry so that you can play off each other very well, like you always see on newscasts and things like that. But you also want to be able to be around this person for potentially hours at a time and multiple times a week, depending upon how often you record. If you can't stand that person, it's not going to work.
Nope.
And you don't want to be the first podcaster that's now thrown in jail on a life-term sentence because you had to kill your co-host.
Probably wouldn't be the first.
At least in the headlines, it seems like it. But you don't want to be that person. Unless that's your idea, by all means, as long as it's not me, go for it. You want to make sure that you're vetting your co-hosts. Make sure that not only are they on the same page, but understand where you're coming from, too. It shouldn't be just some random person, and it doesn't necessarily have to be family either.
And talk to them before you press record. Make
Yes.
sure you can have a conversation with them and they kind of understand how you operate. Like when I did internet radio, it was not solely with her. I owned the station with two other people that were not living with me. They were just
It was
friends.
incompatible.
It ended up not working. A big thing was we talked.
You're speaking
outside
from
of the
experience.
podcast. We talked outside of the podcast. We had a relationship besides just being co-hosts, and that helped a lot. Yeah, with Dory and I, because we're married, we've already got that rapport, so we know how each other operate.
Well, that's good, but that's good information because I see all the time on social media where people will put, "Hey, I want to start a podcast, but I want a co-host," so that they're going to be searching for someone. And, one of the things that's important, like you said, is having the conversations, and you have to be able to be around this person for numerous and copious amounts of time.
That would scare me, going in blind, just some stranger I picked up on the internet. That would be nerve-wracking.
Yes. So here's the fun part of the show now. We get to talk about and promote your podcast and what you do, because it is important to not only be able to have guests on and teach other podcasters, but then also talk a little bit more and promote about what it is that, both of you do and why it matters so much, not only to yourselves, but then to your communities as well. So tell me a little bit about the Othering podcast and what you've not only done in the past, but what do you see for it moving forward?
Let's start with the name. Othering podcast is because growing up as an obvious not white person, I know, shocking, but sometimes people are, but being felt and feeling that I wasn't really there. I wasn't, fitting in with people. I was friends with everybody, but not really having best friends, and just kind of being pushed to the side, feeling like the token person so that people can say, "See, I'm not racist. I'm friends with her," is how it always felt. And that feeling makes you feel like you're othered, that you're just not the mainstream. And that's where the name came from. And I hated that feeling. And I don't want anybody else to ever feel that way. So I wanted to advocate and create an experience for people to share who they are, so that they are viewed as humans, that, it doesn't matter what you look like. Doesn't matter what may be quote unquote wrong. You're still a human. You still, have thoughts and feelings. And what are those? And how have you been othered? How did you overcome it and things like that? And making it so that there's other children out there that when they listen with their parents, they're not, they're realizing that, oh my gosh, I feel this way. I'm not alone. Other people have gone through this same exact thing and they survived. And sometimes it's not enough to know that, not everybody dies in, childhood or anything like that. And you realize that, but you're still in those teen or young adult thoughts and feelings of, I'm just alone. But hearing it, now you're not.
And she was pretty much the whole reason this started. And this was all on Dory. But as she kind of mentioned the name, in my mind, I'm thinking like promotionally speaking, marketing, and just technically I'm thinking about it. And I'm like, that's a perfect name. That sounds good. it's interesting. People are going to wonder what it means, stuff like that. So I kind of went into it with a different view. Of course, I agree with her beliefs and everything, but
Yes,
I went into it more with how do we make this successful and how do we push it out there kind of mentality. And I think that really helped us work together to build the podcast it is.
Now that you've gone from where you started to this point in the journey, do you see for yourselves a point where you say, okay, we've done enough, let's walk away? Or is it something that you can say, you know what, I'm just going to do this for as long as I possibly can because it's fun. I love doing it. It's super passionate. Because I'm just somebody who likes to have a finite point on certain things. There's some things that I do continuously, but there are other things where I know that life changes, life transitions. So I do kind of have a mindset of I have to have an end point somewhere.
At the beginning, I said that we can keep going because we have guests. That's why we have to keep going. For one, we've got episodes coming out until like mid-July, something like that. And then we've got guests scheduled 3 times a week up through into May. So there's no stopping anytime soon. And I'm really happy about that. I have no intention.
I don't want to stop because there's always going to be some marginalized community that needs a voice. And as long as I'm alive and as long as we keep getting marginalized, I want their voices out there. Because I find it hard to look somebody in the face when you've heard their story and you know their name, you know what they went through, and say, oh yeah, you deserve to die. It's not that easy.
Yeah.
But it's great and easy when they're abstract. And so I want to put a story behind those faces that in a lot of horrific regimes tend to be the first ones to be murdered.
So in the end, we're doing this to make a difference. If we make a difference in one person's life, that makes us happy as could be. If we get lots of listeners, that's an added bonus. If we make money off of it, that's a bonus. That's not why we're doing it. We want to make the difference. We want to try to make the change. And
I love that.
People.
Well, hopefully one day I'll come back and you guys have like 700 episodes.
Yeah.
I remember when we were itty bitty and we only had like, 20, 30, 40, because that's part of the reason that I want to inspire, just kind of like what you just mentioned, is I want to inspire other people to give them the tools to start building and sharing their voice. But I also want to be able to give them the least amount of resistance in getting started because I want it to be a prolonged thing. I want it to be able to share something and continually push themselves to do more because they start realizing more and more as they do it that it has more significance and meaning behind what they're creating. And that's one of the things that as I progress in doing this, is I want to ask other podcasters, like, what has been the discipline or the execution that has sustained you to continue to do it? For you guys, it sounds like it's passion.
Yes.
You need to do this. So I want to say thank you again, Mike and Dory, for taking the time to do this. I really do appreciate it. The podcast will be launching April 2nd. I'm very much like you, Mike. It's hard to say no to some people, so I already have 30 interviews lined up here within the next 3 weeks, and I'll be releasing them twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So thank you again, though. I love what you both shared, what you continue to do, and eventually I will have a recap show where I bring back. So I would love to reach out to you because you are officially, you are the first.
Thank you.
Thank you again. You guys have been awesome. I do appreciate it.
Thanks so much for spending this time with us on the podcast about podcasting. New episodes drop every week, so make sure you're subscribed so you never miss a thing. To connect with Mike and Dory or follow along on their podcasting journey, check out The Othering Podcast at otheringpodcast.com. We'll see you next week.
If you've been listening to this show, you already know the audio quality isn't an accident. Those intros and outros? Created with 11 Labs. And no, I didn't spend a fortune or waste hours in a studio to get there. 11 Labs gives you access to a massive catalog of professional-grade voices, or you can clone your own. Either way, you get broadcast-quality sound that makes your content feel legitimate from the first second. Right now, you can start a free trial and get 10,000 credits for just $11 a month.
That's professional-level audio production for less than 2 cups of coffee. Click the link in the show notes and start elevating your creative process today.